Hello, welcome to Your Voice. Over the next half an hour or so, we're going to be answering your questions about the concerns that you might have about the impact of the Iran war on the cost of living. We've got a lot to get through, and thank you to those of you who have sent questions through. We've got a great panel of experts, a huge amount of expertise between them. Let me introduce you to them this afternoon. Joining us to answer your questions, Susanna Streeter, financial commentator and chief investment strategist at the investment service Wealth Club, Lindsay Cook, consumer finance journalist and host of the Mrs. Mean Money Show, Simon Calder, travel editor at The Independent, and we've also got Tom Bradshaw, president of the National Farmers Union. Thank you so much to you all for joining us this afternoon. We've got a lot to get through, as I say. Let's start with our first topic. A lot of response to this, energy bills. Let's begin with a broad question. Susanna, to you first of all. Will energy bills go up because of the war?
Well, it was certainly looking as though there was going to be a pretty big spike, that there'll be a rise in the energy price cap in July. That is still looking likely, but just in the last couple of hours, we've seen the price of Brent crude retreat yet again. It's now back to around $84 a barrel, falling around $10 in just a matter of hours today, and really down from those scorching prices that we saw yesterday morning when it almost hit $120 a barrel. So right now, thankfully, it does look as though, even though there is going to be a price rise, it could be minimal. But that's not to say it won't go up, because even at $84 a barrel, it's still significantly higher than what we saw before the build-up to the Iran conflict, when it was more like $60 a barrel. And you see this knock-on impact because, of course, energy bills are set by wholesale prices, not just crude oil, but also in the gas wholesale market, and you've seen spikes in gas as well. So you're going to see this feed through. The question is, how long will the conflict continue for?
Indeed, Susanna. Let's bring you a video next. We've had a video from Bradley from Lincolnshire. Bradley has sent us a question about bills for people living off the main gas grid. Let's just have a listen to what he says.
Oil prices in my area around 2 weeks ago were 60p per litre, and now they're around £1.50 per litre, almost 3 times as much, which means the average household filling up their oil tank, which you do 2 to 3 times a year, is around £300-400 more expensive. There's also issues with the supply chain. Many companies in my area are no longer doing online orders, and it's really hard to get oil into the tank unless you do an SOS or an emergency oil order, which again has an even higher hiked price. I just wonder what the government and other organisations are planning to do to make sure the system doesn't suffer from profiteering when things like this happen, and also make the system fairer, affordable and regulated. We don't benefit from anything like the price cap that gas and electricity does, so we're kind of victim to whichever large organisations in our area are selling oil.
Well, that was Bradley from Lincolnshire. Lindsay, one for you. I mean, you can hear that people are worried, aren't they, about what's going on? And the question from Bradley, what is the government doing to help?
Well, so far, the government's talking about it, but not doing anything. They must bring in a rescue for these people. I mean, there does seem to be some profiteering already. Last week, the price doubled. Then over the weekend, 3 times. People can't get the supplies, or they're limited to 500 litres. It just isn't working. So something needs to be done quickly for all these people who, for no fault of their own, are having to use heating oil because there is no gas in their areas.
All right, Lindsay, thank you for answering that one. Let's just bring you another question we've had, and sticking with energy costs. This one is from Philip Tracy from Edinburgh. Thanks for getting in touch, Philip. Philip asks, with energy costs seemingly being a worry for the government, why are we not focusing on developing our existing oil and gas discoveries? And in fact, we've got a similar question to another question we've had from Chris. Let's take a listen to what Chris says. All right, so we haven't got that clip from Chris, but Susanna, let's just get a bit more reaction from you. Somebody sitting at home and concerned about energy prices, what can be said to try and alleviate people's concerns?
Put forward that to try and bolster energy security. In fact, there should be more licenses really given out to explore entirely new fields, but the problem is that will take 5 to 10 years to develop those fields, so it's not going to actually have an impact on the immediate prices. And also, even if they were developed, they would still be priced as wholesale markets currently are. So it wouldn't really solve that issue entirely. And what the government is doing is trying to put more money into the grid infrastructure to increase our reliance on renewables and try and take us away from these volatile oil and gas markets, particularly gas, although that is going to take considerable time. And we need a huge amount of infrastructure spending on it. Now, what has happened recently is that Rachel Reeves and other G7 finance ministers have said that they will stand by to release oil reserves. And that had an immediate calming effect on crude prices. You could see them fall back in real time after that announcement. So that security and that confidence given to traders and to nations and to companies buying oil, that actually you won't see these super elevated prices, because there were warnings that crude could hit $150 a barrel, because they've come forward and said we will release supplies. That has done the job of helping to bring down crude prices as well. So it's really trying to give more confidence and plough more confidence into the market. So far, it does seem to be working to some extent.
All right, Susanna, I think we can now, though, bring you that clip that we mentioned before we just came to your answer from Chris, who sent in a question. Let's have a listen.
Hello, I'm Chris. Why are we not using our own North Sea oil and gas resources for our energy security when we're paying more to import it from overseas? The government's losing revenue by not having it produced here, and it's still got a big carbon footprint no matter where it's produced. Thanks.
Lindsay, what do you make of that comment from Chris?
Well, renewables are the way forward in the end. They take a time. Why not do half and half? Exploit the North Sea where you can, but also renewables are cheaper. We have a silly system for pricing gas and electricity. We need to use the real price of renewables so that the prices come down. But also for individuals, householders, they should be looking at what's happening now, every bit of good news, check whether there is a fixed price that they can get. There are 12 million homes that have got fixed price tariffs that are cheaper than the price cap. There will be others that they're less good at the moment, but every bit of good news, people will put a new product into the market. So it's worth trying over the next 3 months or so to see if you can get a better fix or a better price on a fix before July.
All right, Lindsay, good advice there to shop around is, I think, what you were saying in your answer. Let's move on to another topic, and we've had a lot of response to this one. Let's have a look at travel and holidays, how that might be impacted by the war in Iran here in the UK. And if you're planning, for example, on booking a holiday, how that's going to impact you. I want to bring in Simon Calder, travel editor at The Independent. Hi, Simon.
Yeah, I'm in Yogyakarta in Indonesia. I've been travelling across Australia and Southeast Asia for the past week, and the most instant impact is on tens of thousands of travellers who find themselves on the wrong side of the Gulf airspace shutdown. I've met people who have spent up to £10,000 on new flights, getting them back from Sydney to the UK. A couple who are farmers. They had no choice. They actually had to fly back via San Francisco because there was nothing going the normal westbound direction via the Gulf. Fares have shot up. Availability volatility has come down, and unfortunately, air passenger rights rules don't apply if you are booked on a non-European, non-UK airline and you're flying from outside Europe. So Etihad, Emirates, and Qatar Airways simply do not need to look after you beyond giving you your money back if they're unable to fly you.
Let's just go back, Simon, to holidays. For anyone who's looking to book a holiday with the Iran war still going on at the moment, I mean, are they looking at increased prices, or is it difficult to kind of pinpoint given, depending on where these people go?
Well, you've been having a really interesting discussion about oil prices. And of course, a very key element of any airfare is the fuel. There won't be an instant impact because all the big airlines are hedged. In other words, they have bought forward a lot of their fuel requirements, certainly for the rest of this year, at a reasonable fare. So it won't immediately impact them. Looking ahead, though, certainly you can expect if the price of oil stays high, that will feed through to increase both flight-only deals and also package holiday prices. Now, where we're going to see some interesting developments this coming summer are going to be, I predict, higher prices for holidays in places like Spain and Portugal. And that's because there is most definitely a move away from Cyprus and Turkey. People have seen that there has been some problems there. I personally would very happily go to either country, but some people are moving away. They're going west. They're going to the Western Mediterranean and to Portugal, maybe the Spanish and Portuguese islands as well. They'll be feeling safer, but they will be paying more for it. And looking longer term, it's anybody's guess what happens to those familiar winter holidays in the Gulf. So many people like to go to Dubai in the winter. Whether they will want to do that 9-10 months from now is anybody's guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point, Simon. Just briefly, you touched on it in your first answer, but just outline for us the protections that people have if they have had their holiday, their flight cancelled because of what's going on in Iran and around that area.
Well, if you're travelling out from the UK, it's fantastic. The airline has to find you another way of getting you to your final destination as soon as possible. Also provide a hotel and meals. But coming back, I'm afraid you have no such protections. I've got some skin in the game. My flight on Saturday, I'm not quite sure if it's going to be going ahead, Jakarta to Abu Dhabi on Etihad, or indeed if I'm going to invalidate my travel insurance by stepping aboard, because of course the UAE is still on the no-go list for the Foreign Office.
All right, Simon Calder, thank you very much for that. All really interesting stuff. Let's move on now to our next topic, prices at the pump. If you're going to fill up with petrol, and if you might have noticed a difference already, it's a topic that a lot of you have been in touch with on. Let's have a listen to Gary from Cornwall. Gary's been in touch with a question on fuel prices.
Hi, my name's Gary. I live in Plymouth but work as a groundsman in St Mirren, Cornwall. What I want to know is, why does the price at the pumps go up almost immediately when something like this happens? But then when the oil price drops, it takes months to come down, if it does at all.
Susanna, can you answer that one for us?
Yes, we have seen this before, haven't we? Prices go up like a rocket, but come down like a feather, fall like a feather, and it is extremely frustrating. Now, in 2022, 2023, there was so much concern about this that the Competition and Markets Authority launched an investigation, and what they found is that simply there is a lack of competition around. Really, the market is split up into a handful of big operators, and although there's not actually a cartel operating, they did say that the retail margins have gone up significantly from something like 4% to 8%. Now, what they recommended is a fuel finder system to be put in place, and actually it began this month. So you can go onto the fuel finder and try and find a forecourt which is the most competitive in your area. The whole idea for that is to try and force more competition into the industry, because you have seen prices rise for petrol and diesel just days after the initial attacks on Iran. Well, actually, they'd already bought that fuel in advance, but even so, prices were going up. Now, as I said earlier, crude prices have dropped dramatically, really volatile fashion, just in the last 24 hours. So you really should not see such huge price rises as we did expect, although I do suspect they will still creep upwards, because even at $84 a barrel, they still are significantly higher than they were before the conflict. But really, again, it's shopping around, and there is this new tool for you to do just that.
All right, Susanna, and shopping around and fuel finder, a good tip there as well. Thank you for that. Let's just bring you a question from Jeff. Jeff has been in touch. A lot of petrol stations have at least 1 month's supply underground, Jeff says, and supply depots that have at least 3 months in stock. So are we being ripped off by greedy business? Simon, can you answer that one?
Well, look, it's absolutely incumbent, as we've been hearing, on people to make the most of extracting the best possible price for fuel. There's all kinds of reserves for all kinds of fuel in order to help people out when things get tricky. But ultimately, the price that the market will sustain is the price that will be charged. And so, therefore, motorists have very often seen that prices can go up very, very swiftly. They take a lot longer to reduce. The only weapon that the motorist really has is price comparison and making it worthwhile for some suppliers to be absolutely have the keenest prices in the market.
Thanks, Simon. Susanna, I can see you were nodding along to what Simon was saying there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, and I just wanted to add, obviously they do need to keep fuel in reserve in case there is an emergency, there's a shortage of fuel. And certainly what we do not want to see is some kind of panic buying scenario, because at the moment there isn't a shortage. It's just there is this potential for a price increase. But it is really important that people still fill up as they usually do. Perhaps they might put a little bit more in, but certainly we are not in any kind of fuel shortage situation.
All right, well, staying with this topic, let's have a listen to the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who addressed the House of Commons, in the House of Commons, this topic this lunchtime. She said that she felt some businesses are using the crisis in the Middle East as an opportunity to rip off consumers. Let's take a listen to the Chancellor.
Yesterday, some petrol retailers charged almost 180p per litre, while others were charging less than 130p per litre. This government will not tolerate price gouging, and I will be meeting with petrol retailers this week to raise concerns to get prices down at the pumps for all of our constituents.
Simon, just very briefly before we move on to the next topic, just your reaction to what the Chancellor said today.
Well, that's very, very encouraging, but ultimately, petrol retailers, like any retailers, will charge with whatever they think they can get away with, bluntly.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Simon Calder. Let's move on to our next topic, the weekly shop, an important one. Let's bring in Tom Bradshaw, as I said at the beginning, President of the National Farmers Union. First question, Tom. Will we see food prices rise because of the war? And if so, how quickly?
I think the critical thing is to say that there is no shortage of food at the moment. So it goes back to no panic buying, the stocks are available. What we're really concerned about is this reminds us of the Ukraine crisis, where energy prices went through the roof. And that market volatility is something we're seeing again, with red diesel prices rising, fertiliser prices unavailable at the moment, with a lot of fertiliser still to buy. And if this conflict lasts for any length of time, then we really worry that this is the next wave of inflationary pressure across the food supply chain. Because right from farm to fork, it's a very energy intensive sector, from fertilisers to gas to diesel that delivers and collects the grain or the milk. And so it's very energy intensive, and it will have a real impact if it continues for any length of time.
And Tom, in your role, you're president of the National Farmers Union. What impact has the war in Iran had so far on farmers?
So we've seen red diesel prices rise by over 50%. It's a critical time of year for planting next season's crops, for getting fertiliser out onto the cereals and onto the grassland. A lot of farmers haven't bought all of the fertiliser that they need because cash flow pressures have been very tight with a couple of challenging years. And also livestock farmers wouldn't normally have the fertiliser on farm yet. If that fertiliser isn't available, then that's when we're going to see some real challenges for production, which really from the summer on, we'll start to see the impacts of that. Last summer was very, very dry. We had 6 months of incredibly dry weather, and forage stocks on our livestock farms are very, very low. And so getting that fertiliser out now is absolutely essential to make sure that we don't compound that issue by producing less forage this year. For cereal farmers, it's been 2 very challenging years with global markets below the cost of production. And the very real question that farmers are asking themselves now, if they haven't got all the fertiliser they need, is should they continue planting the crop, or is the risk just too high? And that's the challenge that farmers are facing.
And you mentioned in your first answer, Tom, how important it is not to panic buy. I mean, should there be a lot of messaging around that, and who should that come from?
I think ultimately that's probably from government at this stage. I mean, clearly we do import a lot of out of season fruit and vegetables, and there will be immediate impacts on the cost of energy for shipping that in or for flying that product in. So I think there's immediate inflationary increases there. We need to reflect on what we need from a resilient food system here in the UK. Just 2 weeks ago, we had our NFU conference, which was all about the resilience of domestic food production with 70 million consumers here. We know that consumers can't afford to see food price increases, but farmers cannot absorb these cost increases at a farm level. And we've had our support systems changed in recent years, and we have no resilience coming into our farm businesses from the old support schemes. So I think that there is also a role for government here looking at how we can try to mitigate these huge inflationary pressures that we're seeing right the way across the food supply chain.
Important points. Thank you very much for that. Lindsay, I just want to ask you, you're a consumer finance journalist. I'm sure you've got a lot of tips to share on this. Lots of people asking, how can I manage my weekly shop?
Well, first of all, you don't have to buy the branded goods, the expensive ones that have all the advertising costs attached. There are lots of own brands. We've got discounting stores, which are generally, their prices are stable. Whereas the big supermarkets, you find prices can go up 50 pence one week and down £1 the next week. Some of this is down to the so-called loyalty schemes. But if you haven't got a card and you don't have enough money to buy things when they're cheap, you lose out. So you have to write a list, keep to a list, go for, as I say, the cheaper items. So often things, as I say, can go up or down £1 between one shop and the next. And I find that the last weekend of the month, when people are being paid, the prices tend to be a bit higher than they are in the middle of the month when we're a bit tighter for cash. The supermarkets play us.
All right, and Susanna, how about you? How would you answer that? How can I manage my weekly shop?
Well, I'm a big fan of the yellow stickers, certainly. Bargain hunting, I've always been a bargain hunter, but also batch cooking, that kind of thing. You just have to be really prepared, but you can save a lot by freezing meals that you've made in advance. But also, let's think about people who live nearby you, single elderly people in particular. Do make a meal for them if they're down the road. It just will make it so much easier all round and spread that community spirit. It's not that much more effort. It can make a huge difference. And remember as well, there are plenty of organisations running warm spaces still right now. And do take advantage of that because there are charities out there willing to help.
All right, Susanna, let's move on to the final topic that, again, a lot of people have been in touch with. It's rent and mortgages. We can't talk about inflation and price rises without touching on the impact on homeowners or renters, if you're one of those, because the war, of course, will have an impact on them too. It was widely expected that interest rates would fall this year. Could the war mean mortgage rates start rising again instead? Susanna?
Well, we have certainly had a reassessment of where interest rates may be before the end of the year. But as I say, with energy prices on wholesale markets changing all the time, this is also changing. So the Bank of England was expected to bring in one or maybe two interest rate cuts this year. Then yesterday, all bets changed. The expectation was that they would keep rates on hold until the end of the year and then possibly even increase them in November or early next year. I think now you are seeing crude prices fall pretty dramatically. The Bank of England is just going to be in wait and see mode, but that does mean that already we've seen some of the better fixed rate mortgage deals being pulled from the market. However, we'll just have to see how long the conflict continues for. If it ends relatively quickly, there will be a hope that if energy prices continue to fall back, even though they're still staying a little bit elevated, that you may still see an interest rate cut this year. But certainly, I think the Bank of England will hold off and take this wait and see approach.
All right, Lindsay, let me ask you this question. Over 1 million borrowers on fixed rates deals are due to have them expire between now and September. What advice do you have for people who are renegotiating their mortgage?
Well, already lots of lenders have increased their fixed rate mortgages by about 0.25% so far. Halifax did all theirs today. Santander is doing theirs tomorrow. There's likely to be another 0.25% if this goes on for any time. But if you've got, when you're you need to renew, you can apply 6 to 9 months in advance, get a current rate fixed for you, and you then are secure. And quite frankly, if rates did come down, they wouldn't hold you to that fix either. So it's difficult. Fixed rate mortgages are assessed according to gilt rates, swap rates, etc. We don't know what's going to happen. The gilt rates have come down slightly today. Maybe they'll come down some more, but fix it as soon as you can. You can do it as 6 to 9 months in advance, and make sure you can get the loan. Don't sit out and worry about it. I've been asked by several people. There are good loans still available today, but people who were expecting 3.5% at the beginning of the year or 3.74% at the beginning of the year now are looking to be paying 4.5% to 5%. You just need to get it fixed. If you're coming from a 1% mortgage, it's really hard. You may be able to ask the lender to make you increase your term from 30 to 35 years. There are all sorts of ways. The lenders want to help. You need to tell them what you need.
All right, Lindsay, thank you for that. Susanna, final question to you, and it's to do with renters and landlords. If landlords face higher mortgage costs due to rising interest rates and energy bills, how likely is it these increases will be passed on to renters?
I think they will eventually be passed on. We saw this certainly a couple of years ago when we had, of course, interest rates are ramping up and you did see rents rise as a result. I am hoping that the huge rise we've seen in energy costs will abate even more and that actually we will see future interest rate cuts. Let's remember the economy is struggling and there could be disinflationary pressures also percolating as well. If energy costs remain elevated, because it's not great for companies, it's not great for consumers, people be tempted to slow down spending elsewhere. So there is this tricky balance taking place. But I do think that you could see further rent rises. But let's hope that we don't get that far, because that would be a kind of secondary effect.
All right, Susanna, thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you to all four of you. We packed in a lot throughout that half hour. Susanna Streeter, Lindsay Cook, Simon Calder and Tom Bradshaw. Thank you very much indeed for joining us to answer our audience questions. A lot of questions that's still coming in over the last half an hour. And thank you to you for sending them in as well. If you have any more questions about this topic or any other story, you can contact us on WhatsApp. I'll just read you that number, 07756 165 803, or if you prefer email, you can email yourvoice@bbc.co.uk. Thank you so much for your company. Until next time, bye-bye for now.